On December the 4th of 2023, Chance Comanche, a player for the Stockton Kings, the NBA G League affiliate of the Sacramento Kings, checked into the M Resort and Casino in Henderson, Nevada. The following night, the 27-year-old played a game with the Kings at the Dollar Loan Center. Comanche traveled with his teammates back to the hotel before he got in the car of his 19-year-old ex-girlfriend, Sakari Harnden. They then met up with 23-year-old Mariana Rogers and traveled to a cul-de-sac to have a three-way intercourse. Rogers and Harnden operated as escorts in the Las Vegas area. Harnden had told the other woman that Comanche was a client that wanted to tie them both up as they had relations. In reality, Comanche had been asked by Harnden to help kill Rogers, as the two women had been feuding. They'd previously argued over a Rolex watch and had also gotten into an altercation on December the 4th after Harnden had allegedly implicated Rogers' boyfriend in a double murder in California, for which the man was arrested. Messages exchanged between Harnden and Comanche indicated that they'd failed to secure a hitman before they devised a plan to separate Rogers from her friends, kill her, and dispose of the body. The duo had discussed shooting, poisoning, or strangling her before they ultimately settled on the latter. Comanche wrote that he could snap her neck with a piece of rope from the back seat, like how the killers do it in the movies. While the trio was in Harnden's car on December the 6th, the woman removed their clothes. Harnden then climbed over the center console and straddled Rogers. Thinking it was part of Comanche's paid intercourse demands, the latter agreed to have her hands bound with plastic zip ties, handed to Harnden by Comanche. The latter then wrapped an HDMI cable around Rogers' neck and Harnden started strangling the woman with her hands. While still straddling her, the NBA player and Harnden applied pressure to the victim's neck until she was dead. They then pulled over to the side of a road in Henderson, dumped her body in a ditch, and covered it with rocks. Comanche and Harnden smashed Rogers' phone and remained in contact after the killing. The NBA player coached Harnden through talking to law enforcement, telling the teen on the morning of December the 6th, "They only know what you tell them, and you got this, boo. This is the post-game interview. Just smile and wave." A day after the killing, Comanche played a game with the Kings in Portland. Harnden was tied to Rogers' disappearance and arrested on December the 13th. 2 days later, Comanche was arrested at the Kings' practice facility. He confessed to his involvement in the murder that same day and pointed to a location on a map where the authorities found Rogers' body. He and Harnden were charged with murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. Number 6. Amir Coffey. Amir Coffey of the LA Clippers was arrested for misdemeanor firearm possession in late July of 2023. Law enforcement in Hollywood had performed a routine traffic stop on a vehicle at the intersection of Sunset Boulevard and Highland Avenue. Officers carried out a search of the vehicle after they detected a strong smell of marijuana emanating from it. They then came upon a loaded handgun, and 26-year-old Coffey, who was a passenger in the vehicle, admitted that the weapon was his. He was booked at the LA County Jail and spent several hours behind bars before he was released on his own recognizance. He faced up to a year in prison and a $1,000 fine for his charge, but since he was a first-time offender, his punishment was expected to be lighter. Number 5. Kevin Porter Jr. On September the 11th of 2023, the NYPD arrested Houston Rockets guard Kevin Porter Jr. after he'd assaulted his girlfriend, Kaisri Gondrezic, at the Millennium Hilton, New York. 26-year-old Gondrezic was a professional athlete herself, having previously played for the WNBA's Indiana Fever and Chicago Sky. She was reportedly upset with how late Porter had stayed out and locked him out of their hotel room. Upon his return, Porter gained access with the help of hotel security. Sometime later, an argument erupted during the course of which he struck and strangled Gondrezic. The woman escaped the room and was found by hotel staff, who alerted law enforcement. Porter was arrested on felony second-degree assault and strangulation charges, while Gondrezic was taken to a hospital with what was reported as a neck fracture and bruising. Updates from Manhattan Assistant District Attorney Myra Kurza indicated that Gondrezic's neck condition hadn't been a result of the assault, but a congenital defect. Porter was barred from having any interaction with the Rockets in the aftermath of his arrest. As of October of 2023, Porter was offered a plea deal for third-degree assault and second-degree strangulation, which he reportedly rejected. He faced up to 7 years in prison if convicted on the charges. Number 4. Ja Morant. A point guard drafted by the Memphis Grizzlies in 2019, Ja Morant rapidly made an impression in the NBA and was named the Rookie of the Year. In 2020, his prowess on the court, however, would soon come to be contrasted by his legal problems outside of it. In July of 2022, Morant was accused of punching a teenager in the face during a pickup game at his home. According to a lawsuit filed in September by the victim in Shelby County, Tennessee, he and Morant had been involved in an argument during the game. The teen admitted that he'd thrown a ball at the pro player, accidentally hitting him in the face. Morant retaliated by punching the teen with a closed fist and knocking him to the ground, where he delivered several more strikes. A friend of Morant's reportedly joined in the brawl and also hit the teenager. Moments later, the NBA star went into his house and emerged with a gun tucked in his waistband. The teen's mother subsequently took him to the hospital and filed a police report, with deputies describing that the victim had a large knot on the side of his face as a result of the altercation. Morant admitted that he'd struck the teen but maintained that he'd acted in self-defense, claiming that the assault victim had made verbal threats, due to which Morant and his family were put in fear. No criminal charges were filed, and the suit remained unresolved as of the latest updates. A few days prior to beating the teenager, Morant had been involved in another incident at a Memphis mall. His mother had reportedly gotten into an argument with an employee and called the NBA player for backup. He arrived at the mall with an entourage of at least 9 people, and a confrontation ensued with the establishment's head of security. The authorities were called after Morant and his posse refused to leave the parking lot. As the group eventually cleared off, the NBA star was heard saying, in reference to the security worker, "Let me find out what time he gets off." In March of 2023, law enforcement in Glendale, Colorado started investigating Morant after he'd flashed a gun at a nightclub. The incident occurred during an Instagram live stream just hours after the Grizzlies had lost to the Denver Nuggets. In the aftermath, Morant entered a counseling program in Florida and took some time off from the team. He again brandished a gun during an Instagram live session in May of 2023, which resulted in the league banning him for 25 games. Number 3. Amari Stoudemire. Former Phoenix Suns and New York Knicks star Amari Stoudemire was arrested in Miami-Dade County, Florida in December of 2022 for attacking his teenage daughter. According to sports journalist Andy Slater, the 2003 Rookie of the Year and 6-time All-Star had told local law enforcement that his daughter had received a whooping from him for being disrespectful and a liar. He was arrested at his Brickell condo in Miami. Stoudemire had reportedly punched his daughter in the jaw and slapped her hard enough to draw blood because she'd reportedly talked back to him and her grandmother. An arrest report noted the presence of blood on the teen's sweater and sweatpants. 40-year-old Stoudemire was consequently charged with misdemeanor battery, and his bail was set at $1,500. Today's topic was requested by Shane Reynolds 4276. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Ben Gordon. Former NBA player Ben Gordon began his career with the Chicago Bulls, where he made NBA history as the only player to win the league's 6th Man of the Year award as a rookie. Gordon arguably had his best seasons with the Bulls before moving on to the Pistons and then the Hornets. After ending his career with the D-League Texas Legends in 2017, Gordon had a series of legal problems stemming from his erratic and violent behavior. His outbursts were suspected to have stemmed from his struggles with bipolar disorder, to which the former player admitted in 2020. In 2017, he was arrested at least 3 times. The incidents involved Gordon pulling fire alarms at his apartment building, an October altercation with a woman at a wellness center, as well as punching the manager of a hotel complex, threatening him with a knife, and robbing him of a security deposit Gordon thought he was owed. Gordon was arrested several more times between October of 2022 and April of 2023. On October the 10th, he was taken into custody for punching his son at New York's LaGuardia Airport as they were waiting for a Chicago-bound flight. Since 2018, Gordon's son Elijah had had a protection order legally barring Gordon from taking him outside of Illinois and committing physical abuse, harassment, or the interference with personal liberty. During the October incident, the former NBA star had reportedly struck Elijah multiple times in the face because he'd dropped a book. The 39-year-old was banned from getting on the plane and arrested while Elijah was escorted by an aunt to a local hospital. In early December of 2022, Gordon was arrested after he'd reportedly tried to stab several people with sewing needles in Harlem. And in April of 2023, he was arrested for threatening employees of a juice shop with a knife in Stamford, Connecticut. After number 1, we'll be tagging on a bunch of our older videos about different sports. Stick around if you've missed our old format. If not, I'll see you tomorrow. Number 1. Brin Forbes. By March of 2023, professional basketball player Brin Forbes, aged 29, was back living with his mother with no viable options for the future of his athletic career. A source close to Forbes told the media he believes that his NBA career is no longer an option, and he blames himself for this. Forbes had been playing for the Minnesota Timberwolves and was on the verge of being traded to the Milwaukee Bucks, a team with which he'd previously become an NBA champion in the 2020-2021 season. However, around Valentine's Day 2023, Forbes was arrested for domestic violence. He'd had a heated argument with his fiancée, adult movie star Elsa Jean, during which Forbes struck her several times. 26-year-old Jean, who was roughly a foot shorter than Forbes, required medical treatment after she was reportedly left with bruises all over her body and 2 black eyes. The basketball player was arrested on February the 15th at a residence in north central San Antonio and charged with misdemeanor family violence. He was booked at the Bexar County Jail, but the charge was ultimately dismissed in July of 2023. In the violent incident's wake, Jean moved out and broke off their engagement, but reportedly kept her $30,000 engagement ring, claiming she'd felt entitled to do so for what Forbes had put her through. Updates on the basketball player's situation indicated he received no offers from NBA teams.
Despite being staged, the dangers wrestlers face are often very real. Today we'll have a look at 7 of the world's worst injuries in professional wrestling history. Number 7. Joey Mercury. To botch in professional wrestling means to attempt a scripted move or a scripted line that ultimately does not come out as planned because of a miscalculation, slip-up, or mistake. Most botches are harmless and mainly consist of a wrestler missing his cue, improperly delivering a line, or falling before an opponent's move connects. However, there are examples of botches that have resulted in life-threatening injuries and even death. In late 2006, during WWE's event Armageddon, Joey Mercury and his partner John Morrison took part in a fatal four-way tag team match in which the titles were hung high above the ring and the wrestlers could only reach them by using ladders. Several ladders had been brought to the ring towards achieving the goal within the storyline. Near the midway point of the match, however, Mercury received a legitimate and quite graphic injury. During the bout, Jeff Hardy, one of Mercury's opponents, jumped from the ropes onto a ladder that had been placed on top of another with the purpose of creating a type of seesaw which was meant to hit Mercury and his partner. Unfortunately, Mercury took a direct hit and blood started to gush out of his face. His nose and orbital bone were broken and he would require more than 30 stitches. After a few weeks, Mercury returned to the ring wearing a protective mask. Number 6. Steve Austin. In 1997, Stone Cold Steve Austin was one of WWE's quickest rising stars that had achieved a massive following due to his rebel persona. Although his popularity would continue to grow, his career would forever be plagued by an injury he sustained during an Intercontinental title match against Owen Hart at SummerSlam 1997. Near the end of the match, Hart performed a pile driver on Austin, which is a sit-down upside-down slam. However, Austin's head was much lower than it should have been in order for his neck to be protected. When Hart dropped him, Austin's head and neck were jammed hard into the ground, and he was immediately unable to move his shoulders and neck muscles. He struggled through the pain to complete the match's predetermined finale, and even though the fans saw him get the win, the resulting broken neck would take him out of the circuit for 3 months. The reoccurring effects of the injury would require surgical intervention in 1999, and Austin was unable to compete for 10 months. He had to change his fighting style so that he would not endanger his neck and spinal cord, and ultimately retired in 2003. Number 5. Shawn Michaels. While competing in a 1998 Royal Rumble match, Shawn Michaels, who was at the height of his career at the time, sustained a back injury that would cost him 4 years of his career. The accident took place during a casket match between Michaels and The Undertaker. The objective of the fight was for one wrestler to put the other in a casket and close the lid. In order for the wrestler to complete the scenario, a casket had been placed ringside. After performing a reverse jump from the ring, Michaels landed on his back on the edge of the casket. He did not realize it at the time, but the injury resulted in 1 shattered and 2 herniated discs in his back. Many people, including Michaels himself, believed that he would not wrestle again. Even though he missed 4 years of his prime, Michaels made a recovery and returned to the ring at SummerSlam in 2002. Number 4. Darren Drozdov. During a 1999 match against D'Lo Brown, Darren Drozdov sustained one of the most severe injuries in professional wrestling history. When Brown performed a running powerbomb, his signature move, on Drozdov, he was unable to get a proper grip on him because the latter was wearing a loose shirt during the match. Drozdov also failed to execute a proper jump to assist Brown in the lift leading up to the powerbomb. Drozdov landed on his head and fractured 2 discs in his neck. He was taken out on a stretcher, and despite the extensive medical care and the efforts to reduce the swelling in his spine, the injury left him a quadriplegic with essentially no mobility below the neck. Drozdov never blamed Brown for the tragic end to his career and always expressed his belief that it had been an unfortunate accident. The injury took place during a WWF SmackDown taping and not before a live audience, and the match was never aired. Drozdov was ultimately able to gain some mobility in his upper body and continued to work for the WWE as a writer and a columnist. Number 3. Mick Foley. Also known as Cactus Jack, Dude Love, or Mankind, wrestler Mick Foley was respected among his peers and loved by wrestling fans for his physical toughness. Throughout his career, Foley would engage in a number of hardcore matches in which he would go through tables, barbed wire, and take multiple chair shots to the head. During a mid-1998 match against The Undertaker, Foley's tendency for always pushing his physical limits almost produced a fatal outcome. The Hell in a Cell match took place during a WWE King of the Ring event, and the competitors faced off in a steel cage measuring 15 to 20 feet that had been erected over the ring. The event had no restrictions on the use of weapons, as tables, chairs, and even thumbtacks were allowed. Before the crowd of roaring fans, Foley, who was then wrestling under the name Mankind, and The Undertaker took the fight to the top of the steel cell. Foley was then thrown off the cell and into the commentator's table, situated 20 feet below. The fall not only only caused him to lose consciousness, but also resulted in him suffering a dislocated shoulder and a collapsed lung. He laid under the broken table debris for several minutes before the medical personnel arrived and used a stretcher to carry him towards an exit point. Mick Foley then proved to the world why the fans called him the King of Hardcore after a 20-foot drop that many believed had represented the end of his career and had caused one of the commentators to shout, "Good God Almighty, good God Almighty, that killed him. As God is my witness, he is broken in half." A noticeably dazed Mick Foley got up from the stretcher with a smile on his face and rushed towards the ring. Foley and The Undertaker quickly scaled the cell once more, and they continued to fight on top of it. This time, The Undertaker had also brought a chair with the intention of using it against Foley. He then performed a chokeslam that sent Foley down 15 feet through the top of the cell and onto the hard mat. Neither of the two wrestlers had expected the cell's roof panel to collapse, and in a later interview, The Undertaker said that he believed the second fall had killed Foley. Many of those watching the Hell in the Cell match believed the same, and the commentators urged for the match to be stopped. The footage then showed the King of Hardcore smiling through his bleeding mouth and a loose tooth dangling from his nose. As he fell through the top of the cell, the chair fell with him, landed on his face, and dislocated his jaw. Even after the horrific drop, the match that many still consider to be among the most brutal in wrestling history continued. Foley was later slammed by The Undertaker into hundreds of thumbtacks, which he himself had previously strewn onto the ring canvas. Foley ultimately lost the match, but both wrestlers received a standing ovation at the end. Afterwards, Foley admitted that he could not remember most of the match. The 1998 bout was not, however, Foley's first brush with death or disfigurement. In a 1999 I Quit match for the WWE belt, Dwayne Johnson, also known as The Rock, hit Foley 10 times in the head with a metal chair in front of his wife and children, who were present ringside. Aside from a massive gash on his head and a bloodied face, the strikes also left Foley with several concussions. While on the WCW tour in 1994, Mick Foley sustained one of his most famous injuries. He was wrestling in Munich, Germany, under the name Cactus Jack in a match against Vader, his long-standing rival. Foley got his head caught between the first and second rope in a move called the Hangman that would make it look as if he was choking. Unfortunately, the ropes were too tight, and as he struggled to free himself, Foley severely damaged his right ear. When he returned to the ring and began to trade blows with Vader, a large chunk of his ear fell onto the mat. The referee did not speak English and was unable to tell Foley about what had happened. Instead, he picked up his ear and handed it to the ring announcer. Number 2. Sid Yudi. Standing at 6'9" and weighing over 300 pounds, Sid Yudi's constitution meant that attempting aerial maneuvers would be quite a challenge for him. Unfortunately, during a 2001 match for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, his reluctant attempt at executing a Bigfoot from the top of the second turnbuckle resulted in a near career-ending injury. The move consisted of him kicking with one foot extended while landing on the other. Yudi botched the landing and broke his leg in half, snapping both the tibia and the fibula. At least one of the bones reportedly broke through his skin. During the 2-hour surgery, a 17-inch rod was placed in his leg, and for a period of time afterwards, Yudi used a cane to walk. Number 1. Owen Hart. The death of Owen Hart inside the ring is often cited as the most heartbreaking moment in professional wrestling history. It took place during a 1999 WWE event called Over the Edge. At the time, Owen Hart was wrestling under the Blue Blazer persona, an unpopular and buffoonish superhero. The plan was for Hart to be lowered from the ceiling high above the ring with the use of a harness and grapple line. The harness featured a quick-release mechanism. Hart had performed the stunt a few times before. As soon as he would have reached the level of the ring, he was supposed to act tangled, release the mechanism, and fall flat on his face in the ring, in keeping with the idea of his buffoonish persona. In a tragic turn of events, the mechanism was triggered too early, as Hart was being lowered in the ring. One theory is that he had released the mechanism by accident while trying to get comfortable with both his cape and the harness on. Other theories claim that the harness was defective. Hart fell to his death from 78 feet. He landed chest first on the the top rope and was thrown into the ring. Hart received immediate medical attention and was taken to the hospital, where he succumbed to his injuries. The official cause of death was internal bleeding caused by blunt force trauma. The television viewers did not see the accident, as they were shown a pre-taped vignette during the fall. The same footage was also displayed on the monitors in the darkened arena. As Hart was receiving medical attention, the announcer told those watching the live pay-per-view that the accident was real and not part of a prefabricated storyline, emphasizing the fact that Hart was seriously injured. The controversy that followed his death was mainly aimed at the poor planning and dangerous nature of the stunt, on an allegedly defective safety harness, and on the fact that the WWE continued the event after the fatal accident. Hart's family sued the WWF and settled the case for $18 million on the 2nd of November 2000.
From ground-based grappling to stand-up striking, here are 7 of the most effective martial arts forms. These tenacious techniques have created some of the deadliest human weapons on the planet. Number 7. Silat. Roughly translated as fighting skill, Silat is an umbrella term used in reference to the various fighting styles that have originated in the Malay archipelago. Depending on the region, Silat may vary in name and technique. In Malaysia, it is called Silat Malayo, while Indonesian Silat is referred to under the full name Pencak Silat. Nevertheless, there are core similarities between the different forms of the martial art. Its origins rely heavily on oral tradition. Some experts have found a connection between Silat and the fighting styles of ancient Persia, and places creation somewhere between the years 600 and 1200 AD. There are some similarities between Silat and Chinese martial arts, such as taking inspiration from nature and the movements of various animals and building them into the fighting style. Silat Harimau, for example, adapts the movements of the tiger to suit the needs of combat. Harimau involves locks and breaks achieved through fingers in the esophagus, power blows to the head and neck, and pukulan, or multiple striking. Regardless of the region, Silat has a wide range of takedowns and deadly strikes, which are commonly delivered from a much lower stance than other martial arts. The lower stance work also gives Silat great fluidity, as its practitioners can transition very fluently between various facets of fighting, displaying great adaptability both to open environments as well as closed spaces. Silat is not concerned solely with unarmed combat. The arsenal of a seasoned Silat practitioner would most likely include a wave-like sword called the kris, considered both a spiritual object and a weapon, or the karambit dagger. In the hands of an experienced fighter, the karambit is extremely dangerous. The hilt has a ring at the end which the wielder holds with their index finger that facilitates the underhanded grip on the distinctly curved blade. The wielder can unleash attacks from unusual angles that are hard to defend against. Number 6. Dambe. Dambe is a vicious form of fighting with roots in ancient Egypt, commonly associated with the Hausa people of West Africa. Many of the terminology and techniques allude to warfare, and it was traditionally practiced as a means of preparing the men for war. Most of those who practiced Dambe were part of the Hausa butcher caste groups, and the tradition developed into a fighting challenge that commonly took place during the local harvest festival. Nowadays, companies of boxers from various groups travel to compete in outdoor matches that are accompanied by drumming and a ceremony. Usually, Dambe competitors are fairly matched in size, despite the fact that there are no formal weight classes. The 3 rounds that make up a match do not have a time limit and normally end when an opponent's body, knee, or hand touches the ground, when an official or one of the fighters calls a halt, or when there is no activity. To knock an adversary down is referred to as killing the opponent. The main weapon in Dambe is the strong side fist, also known as the spear. The strong side fist is wrapped in a cloth covered by a tightly knitted cord. Although currently considered to be an illegal practice, up until recently, fighters would often dip the spear in a mixture of sticky resin and broken glass. The lead hand, also known as the shield, is held facing the opponent and may be used to hold or grab. The lead leg is often wrapped in thick chain and can be used both defensively and offensively. Both the lead leg and the unwrapped leg can be used to kick. The strikes in Dambe can cause severe damage, and that is why timing is one of the key aspects that fighters must consider in order to avoid serious injury. Number 5. Veil Tudo. Regarded as the precursor of today's mixed martial arts, Vale Tudo is a full-contact combat sport which originated in Brazil that has very few rules attached to its name, which roughly translates as anything goes. It originated in the 1920s when it was showcased at circuses and shows throughout Brazil. Traditional Vale Tudo is aimed at pure combat. Practitioners do not wear gloves, there are no weight classes, and headbutts as well as hits to the throat or testicles are allowed. Aside from moves that will be deemed illegal in most martial arts, such as a standing opponent hitting a grounded one, Vale Tudo fighters may also make use of techniques such as locks, sweeps, grappling and striking, submissions or takedowns. Much like the modern, better organized and safer forms of mixed martial arts, training in Vale Tudo involved a broader understanding of multiple disciplines as well as intense physical conditioning. It evolved from the sideshow brawls into a finer science, but due to its violent and bloody nature, it failed to gain mainstream support and was slowly forced underground. The UFC, or Ultimate Fighting Championship, rose in its place. Even though in the early stages UFC matches bear a resemblance to the violence of Vale Tudo, it gradually progressed into a safer competition with millions of supporters worldwide. Number 4. Muay Thai. Muay Thai was developed in Thailand, and its roots can be traced back to the middle of the 18th century during the battles between Siam and the Burmese of the Konbaw dynasty. Thai folklore tells the story of famous Siamese fighter Nai Kanam Tom, who after being captured by the Burmese invading troops was forced to fight during a 7-day festival organized by King Sien Bayushin. The Burmese ruler wanted to show how Burmese boxing would fare against Muay Boran, which would later become Muay Thai, practiced by Nai Kanam Tom. After using an onslaught of various vicious strikes to take down 10 consecutive opponents with no rest between the fights, Nai Kanam Tom won his freedom and was given a gift of 2 beautiful Burmese wives. The king was so impressed with the performance that he declared that every part of Nai Kanam Tom's body was blessed with venom. Muay Thai gradually grew in popularity and became a national sport in Thailand. It gained an international reputation during the 20th century after several notable practitioners of other martial arts were defeated in tournaments by Muay Thai fighters. Also known as the art of 8 limbs, it is a fighting style that enables its practitioners to use their knees, fists, elbows and shins combined with a series of clinches in full contact bouts. Aside from training routines that include many staples of combat sport fitness such as abdominal exercises, bodyweight resistance exercises, jump rope or running, Muay Thai fighters also undergo a ruthless conditioning regime. Because many of the strikes involve the use of the shin, they harden the bones through a process called cortical remodeling. By hitting bags filled with sand, dense heavy bags or even trees, they break down the bone tissue in their shins, which is then replaced by a new, harder tissue through a process called ossification. Muay Thai strikes are powerful and explosive, and while many fighters use reach and distance to control the pace of a fight, the hardest hits take place during the clinch. Unlike Western boxing, Muay Thai fighters are not separated once they clinch. Instead, they employ various stand-up grappling techniques to deliver punishing knee or elbow strikes from close quarters. Number 3. Systema. The combat style practiced by the infamous Russian Spetsnaz, Systema focuses on controlling the most important parts of the opponent's body, such as the knees, waist, ankles, elbows, shoulders, and neck through critical hits and pressure points. The central principles of this Russian martial art are based on understanding the laws of anatomy and biomechanics, with a focus on exploiting the natural weakness of the human form. It does not have fixed patterns of movement. Training involves drills and sparring that include grappling, hand-to-hand combat, firearms training, and knife fighting. Systema also teaches its practitioner how to confront multiple attackers, some of whom may also be armed. The body has to be filled with explosive potential, effortless movement, endurance, and flexibility. The practitioner has to be free from tensions in a psychological state that is calm and free from fear, anger, pride, or self-pity. Breathing, relaxation, and fluidity of motion are the main focuses of training in Systema. Another important aspect is using the attacker's momentum against him. It is a system based on strengthening the physical, psychological, and spiritual sides of an individual. Russia was attacked by various countries throughout its history, from the Mongols to the Huns. Each new enemy brought a particular fighting style to the country, forcing Russian soldiers to adapt. Thus, Systema was born. Although its origins are uncertain, some historians have traced the martial art back to the 10th century. Number 2. Krav Maga. Krav Maga is a combat system developed for the Israeli Security Forces, Mossad and Shin Bet, and for the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF. It is widely regarded as one of the deadliest martial arts systems ever created, borrowing elements from Aikido, Judo, boxing, wrestling, Muay Thai, and others. It is widely known for its brutal efficiency. Krav Maga practitioners place great emphasis on the instinctive nature of combat, situational awareness, and train to confront and overcome real-world situations. They are taught how to escape chokes and holds, as well as how to deal with attackers wielding knives, bats, or firearms. One of the central ideas is to use aggression and brutal counterattacking techniques to end the fight as quickly as possible, whenever a physical confrontation cannot be avoided. Krav Maga in its original form took the most simple and practical elements from other fighting styles and incorporated them into a system that could be rapidly taught to military conscripts. Some of its basic principles include simultaneous attack and defense, counterattacking as quickly as possible, continuing to strike an opponent until they are completely incapacitated, the use of simple and easily repeatable strikes, and targeting the body's most vulnerable points, such as the eyes, face, throat, groin, solar plexus, knees, or fingers. Krav Maga was developed by Hungarian-Israeli martial arts Imi Lichtenfeld. He used his street fighting experience and his training as a wrestler and boxer to defend the Jewish quarter from fascist groups in Bratislava, Czechoslovakia, during the mid to late 1930s. After migrating to Israel in the late 1940s, Lichtenfeld began providing combat training to what would later become the IDF. Nowadays, several organizations such as the US Marine Corps and British SAS have begun to teach variations of Krav Maga. Although it has a number of core principles, Krav Maga is a fighting system that continuously grows and evolves, always incorporating new techniques in congruence with the real-life situations. Number 1. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or BJJ, was developed into its current form through the various practices, experiments, and adaptations of Kodokan Judo performed by Helio and Carlos Gracie, who passed their knowledge to their extended family. Today, the Gracie name is synonymous with this martial art. The central concept behind BJJ is that a weaker, smaller opponent can successfully defend against a stronger and heavier assailant. In the beginning, to illustrate this point, the Gracie brothers will accept numerous challenges from practitioners of other martial arts, many of whom were more massive than they were, and defeat them in open combat. This was a direct contributing factor to the creation of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. BJJ places great emphasis on groundwork, leverage, and proper technique. It influenced the perception in the mixed martial arts world that fighting should only be focused on stand-up positions. BJJ practitioners will often take the fight to the ground and employ various chokeholds and joint locks to submit their opponents. Even though in a controlled or competitive environment, fighters release the lock following a tap out, in the real world, BJJ can be used to break or dislocate bones. Furthermore, various types of chokes cut the supply of oxygen to the brain and may result in serious health complications if not released in time.
An aggressive state of mind might turn a contender into a champion. But what happens when it affects life outside of the ring? Here are 11 successful boxers with the worst criminal records. Number 11. Anthony Joshua. With a spotless record of 19 wins, all by way of knockout, 27-year-old Anthony Joshua is world heavyweight champion. But there were times in his past when, by his own admission, his life seemed to be heading in a different direction. In 2009, he was on remand in Reading prison for what he described as fighting and other crazy stuff. In March 2011, after being pulled over for speeding in North London, police found 8 ounces of cannabis hidden in his sports bag, and he later pled guilty to a charge of possession with intent to supply a Class B drug. 14 years is the maximum sentence for this crime, but Joshua's guilty plea and the amount found in his possession saw him receive a more lenient sentence of 12 months community service and 100 hours of unpaid work. Although suspended by Team Great Britain, Joshua cited this period as the turning point in his life. Dedicating himself to boxing, he won gold medal at the London 2012 Olympics in the super heavyweight division before turning pro and ultimately becoming the heavyweight champion. Number 10. Jake LaMotta. Some remember the former world middleweight champion who died in September 2017 as having one of the toughest chins in boxing history. Lamata proved this in his 6-bout rivalry with Sugar Ray Robinson, who's widely considered to be the best pound-for-pound boxer of all time. Others remember Lamata as the inspiration for Martin Scorsese's critically acclaimed film Raging Bull that earned Robert De Niro the Academy Award for Best Actor. After his retirement, Lamata became a stage actor and stand-up comedian. He also owned and managed bars. In 1958, he was charged with introducing men to an underage girl at one of his Miami clubs. The former champ served 6 months on a chain gang. Even after his release, Lamata maintained that he was innocent. Number 9. Jack Johnson. For 13 years, he was the most famous and most notorious African American on earth. That was a description filmmaker Ken Burns attributed to Jack Johnson, who in the peak of the Jim Crow era became the first African American heavyweight boxing champion of the world. Johnson reigned supreme for 7 years and was famous for living life in the fast lane and refusing to conform to the segregation present in the United States at the time. As an African American, Johnson broke powerful taboos by consorting with white women. In 1913, he was convicted by an all-white jury for violation of the Mann Act, which refers to transporting women across state lines for prostitution and other immoral purposes. He fled the country but eventually turned himself into federal custody in 1920 and was sentenced to 1 year and a day in prison. His sentence sparked controversy and has been seen as being racially motivated because the Mann Act had not yet been passed when the incidents he was accused of took place. Number 8. Riddick Bo. Riddick Bo grew up in Brooklyn's Brownsville neighborhood. From a background of violence and poverty, he rose to become undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. In February 1998, he was convicted of kidnapping his estranged wife and their 5 children. In a bizarre attempt to reconcile his marriage, Bo drove to his wife's North Carolina home and threatened her with a knife, pepper spray, duct tape, and handcuffs. Forcing his family into a vehicle, he headed for his home in Maryland. Bo reportedly stabbed his wife in the chest during the kidnapping. Police freed the family when they captured Bo in South Hill, Virginia. He pleaded guilty to interstate domestic violence and served 17 months in a federal prison. Number 7. Tommy Morrison. Aside from being WBO heavyweight champion, Tommy Morrison is also known for starring in the 1990 film Rocky V alongside Sylvester Stallone. His personal life was plagued by health issues and legal problems. In December 1993, he was charged with public intoxication and assault after allegedly punching a student from the University of Iowa for, as he described it, staring at him. Morrison retired from professional boxing in 1996 after testing positive for HIV. In October that same year, he received a 6-month suspended sentence after pleading guilty of transporting a loaded firearm. He was convicted for driving under the influence in 1997 after an accident that injured 3 people. In 1999, he was stopped by the police for driving erratically. Upon searching his vehicle, they found weapons and drugs, which led to other charges related to illegal substances and firearms, and in 2000, he was sentenced to 2 years. Number 6. Charles Sonny Liston. Sonny Liston wasn't known for his speed or footwork, but rather for his imposing physique, his massive fists, and for power to knock fighters out with both hands. His legacy is intertwined with that of Muhammad Ali when he was still known as Cassius Clay. Ali took the title from Liston in 1964 and successfully defended it against Liston the following year with a controversial first-round knockout. But despite his losses to Ali, Liston is still ranked as one of the best heavyweights of all time. But before becoming a champion, Liston was arrested numerous times for crimes ranging from muggings to assaulting a police officer and armed robbery. In 1950, he was sentenced to 5 years following a conviction on 2 counts of armed robbery. He was in prison, where he learned how to box and mastered the skills that would ultimately make him a world champion. Number 5. Floyd Mayweather Sr. In the early 90s, Floyd Mayweather Sr. was allegedly part of a drug ring that used detergent boxes to smuggle cocaine into the United States. In 1993, he was arrested for drug trafficking and was sentenced to 5 years in jail, of which he served 3. The former UBF champion retired with a record of 28 wins, 6 losses and 1 draw, and as a trainer helped his son, Floyd Mayweather Jr., to become a world champion and arguably the greatest defensive boxer of all time. Number 4. Mike Tyson. Power, outstanding speed, accuracy, timing, and superior defensive skills are what made Iron Mike Tyson the youngest heavyweight champion of all time when he was only 20 years old. In his own words, he was the baddest man on the planet. In his prime, he was almost invincible, and his fights were some of the most brutal and entertaining the sport has ever seen. In July 1991, Tyson was arrested for the alleged rape of 18-year-old Desiree Washington in an Indianapolis hotel room. Washington, a former Miss Black Rhode Island, claimed that the boxer assaulted her, while Tyson said it was consensual. Testimony from the emergency room physician that consulted Washington more than 24 hours after the incident claimed that her condition was consistent with rape. Tyson was convicted and sentenced to 6 years in prison. The sentence cost the 25-year-old 3 years of his prime, and although he regained his title, he was never quite the same fighter. Number 3. Carlos Monzon. Some say the anger and relentlessness with which Carlos Monzon fought was because of the poverty he faced in his early life. The Argentine boxer was the undisputed middleweight champion for 7 years and defended his title a total of 11 times. His professional record stands at 100 fights with 87 wins, 9 draws and 3 losses. Monzon was famous for his speed, power, and impervious chin. Unfortunately, he carried his aggression outside the ring as well. He faced numerous accusations of domestic abuse from his wives and mistresses and was also accused of beating up paparazzi. His lifestyle was characterized as glamorous and violent and was closely followed by the media and the Argentine people. In 1989, the former world champion was sentenced to 11 years after he was convicted of killing his wife, Alicia Muñoz. In 1988, while the two were vacationing in Mar del Plata, Monzon had strangled Muñoz before picking her up and pushing her off the balcony. Number 2. Edwin Valero. At the time of his death, Edwin Valero held championship belts in 2 different weight classes. The Southpaw was well known for his phenomenal punching power and aggressive style. He never lost a fight, and all of his 27 wins came via knockout. In September 2009, he was arrested on assault charges against his sister and his mother. He denied the allegations, and his mother told the media there had been no foul play. Valero was once again accused of assault in March 2010 after his wife was taken to hospital with bruises and a damaged lung. He was given 6 months of psychiatric rehabilitation, but less than a month later, in April 2010, 24-year-old Jennifer Carolina Vieira de Valero was found dead in a hotel. She'd been stabbed 3 times. Valero was taken to jail as he was considered the main suspect, and he allegedly admitted that he killed her. The day after he was taken into custody, Valero was found hanging in his jail cell by his pants. The official ruling was suicide. Number 1. Floyd Mayweather Jr. Considered one of the best boxers in history, Floyd "Money" Mayweather Jr. has achieved a lot in boxing. 15 world titles in 5 weight classes from 1996 to 2017. He retired undefeated with 50 wins, with his last fight a win against UFC superstar Conor McGregor. Despite the overwhelming ring success, Mayweather's private life has been riddled with domestic violence and battery charges, as well as jail time. In 2002, he was charged with 1 count of misdemeanor battery and 2 counts of domestic violence and was ordered to perform 48 hours of community service. In 2004, after a conviction of 2 counts of misdemeanor battery against 2 women, he was given a year's suspended sentence and ordered to undergo counseling for impulse control. He received a 90-day suspended sentence in 2005 after pleading no contest to a misdemeanor battery charge after kicking and hitting a bouncer. But perhaps the worst moment was when he pleaded guilty to battering the mother of his children, Josie Harris, in front of his children. On December 21st, 2011, he was sentenced to 90 days in a county jail and charged with 2 counts of misdemeanor harassment for threatening his children, to which he pleaded no contest.
From a group of divers forced to survive on the open water to a young woman who drowned on her honeymoon, here's what happens when scuba diving goes wrong. Number 7. Japanese divers. In 2014, a group of 7 female Japanese scuba divers set off from the coast of Bali in serene weather conditions. The group was led by Bali-based instructors Saori Furukawa and Shoko Takahashi. As they were exploring the area, a storm struck, seemingly without warning. Heavy rainfall and strong winds separated the group from their boat and trapped them in a whirlpool together. One of the divers, 59-year-old Ritsuku Mayata, drowned, and instructor Takahashi became lost at sea. Furukawa and the remaining 4 survivors were left drifting on the open water. They got through the first night in the ocean by drinking from passing coconuts and trying to keep each other awake. At one point, Furukawa swam away from the group and tried to intercept a tugboat, but didn't manage to get close enough. The current was too strong and she got separated from the others. 3 days after their ordeal had begun, Furukawa and the other 4 women were rescued. They were found on a large coral reef off a small island called Nusa Penida, almost 19 miles from where they had started their dive. Even though they hadn't had anything to eat and had only drank rainwater, all 5 women survived. Number 6. Jacob's Well. Located northwest of Wimberley, Texas, Jacob's Well is one of the most dangerous diving spots in the US. So far, it has claimed at least 8 lives. With an average depth of 120 feet, the spring is part of an underground drainage system known as a karst. The mouth of the spring is a popular swimming spot. However, for those interested in scuba diving, it's the entrance point to a complex underwater cave system. The problem is that the floors of some of the chambers are covered in silt or fine gravel. Even the slightest brush of the flipper is enough to stir up the sediment and obscure the diver's vision. Navigating it requires specialized technique and equipment. Swimming through the chambers sometimes involves maneuvering through narrow passageways. Such was the tragic case of Southwest Texas State University student Richard Patton. He was looking for a way to move from chamber to chamber when he became stuck in a false chimney that looked like a way out. Number 5. Thomas Pritchard. Scuba diving accidents are a tragedy regardless of how they occur, but perhaps the worst scenario, especially for a diver's family, is when they simply vanish. In 2015, Tom Pritchard had almost 1,000 dives under his belt when he became part of a team that dove to the wreckage of Andrea Doria. The ship had sunk in 1956 after colliding with the MS Stockholm in one of history's best-known maritime disasters. The wreck site soon became known as the Everest of wreck diving, due to the number of divers' lives it has claimed. The wreck has been slowly collapsing for a number of years, with its top resting at 190 feet. Pritchard was tasked with attaching a mooring line to the wreck. When his team surfaced, they noticed that Pritchard was no longer with them. The captain of the ship that had brought the team to the site didn't let the divers go back after him, fearing for their safety. The Coast Guard swept the area, but Pritchard's remains were never found. To this day, nobody knows what happened to him. Number 4. Bushmans Hole. In October 2004, at Bushmans Hole in South Africa, friends Dave Shaw and Don Shirley broke 4 deep diving world records after reaching the cave's floor, almost 1,000 feet beneath the surface. More people have walked the surface of the moon than have dove to such depths. Special technique and highly complex equipment must be used to ensure that the divers survive the incredible amount of pressure. They must follow a rope or a guideline and make regular stops during their descent so that they don't suffer from decompression sickness. During their first dive at the bottom of Bushman's Hole, Shaw's illuminated torch revealed a body embedded in silt. It was South African diver Darren Dreger, who had lost his life to the cave's depths 10 years prior and whose body had remained missing. However, it was too dangerous to recover his remains at that time, so they turned back to the surface. After several months of preparation, in a high media event and accompanied by a documentary film crew, Shaw and Shirley made their attempt to retrieve Dreger's body. Tragically, this would be Shaw's final dive. Video footage from the camera mounted on his helmet showed that since their previous dive, Dreger's body had become loose. Shaw grappled with the body as he struggled to put it in a bag he'd brought with him. At one point, the head came off and peered directly into the camera with its blackened goggles. As he got tangled in the line, Shaw's breathing became faster and labored, allowing more carbon monoxide to fill his lungs. his movements became slower until they ceased entirely. As Shirley approached the bottom rendezvous point with Shaw, he saw an immobile light at the bottom. He knew something had gone wrong, but experienced a problem with his own equipment and knew he had to return to the surface. Then, at about 165 feet, a helium bubble exploded in Shirley's left inner ear, which made him lose his balance. Even though he was completely disoriented, Shirley somehow managed to grab the line as he was spinning into the void. His ascent took more than 12 hours, which he spent in a fog of nausea and exhaustion, but he survived the dive. 4 days after the tragic loss of Dave Shaw, the line was pulled from the cave. The divers were only expecting to retrieve equipment, but then they saw Shaw's body, and tied to the line, they found Dreger's body as well. Even though it cost him his life, Dave Shaw had managed to complete his objective of retrieving Dreger's remains. Number 3. Polyakov Ol. A horrific accident off the coast of Pattaya in Thailand re-emphasized how important it is for divers to mind their surroundings at all times. 40-year-old Polyakov Ol and an unnamed companion were swimming in a proper diving zone. Unfortunately, when they surfaced, they were hit by a passing speedboat. The driver, identified as 47-year-old Ritharong Panla, told the authorities that he was carrying a group of 10 tourists at the time and was unable to stop the boat when the two divers suddenly surfaced. The speedboat's propellers cut Polyakov in half, and his companion, who was also hit, remained missing. Number 2. Yuri Lipsky. A blue hole is a large marine sinkhole that's open to the surface. It's typically created in an island or a bank composed of limestone or bedrock. A blue hole located on the east coast of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula is one of the most coveted diving spots in the world. The coral-lined sinkhole has a depth of about 394 feet. Despite its beauty, it has claimed over 130 lives in the past 15 years. One of the most notable deaths is that of 22-year-old Russian-Israeli diving instructor Yuri Lipsky. He recorded his dive, and the video, which also captured his death, is reportedly still available online. After he reached the sea floor at around 377 feet, he panicked and removed his regulator, the mouthpiece that divers breathe through. It's believed that nitrogen narcosis might have impaired his judgment. Nitrogen narcosis is a mental state that divers experience at great depths, which may involve panic, paranoia, confusion, and even hallucinations. To reduce narcosis and the effects of decompression, deep divers use multiple stage tanks that are filled with trimix, a blend of nitrogen, helium, and oxygen. Lipsky had just one tank with a mix of oxygen and helium called Heliox. Number 1. Tina Watson. In October 2003, 26-year-old Tina Watson from Helena, Alabama, died under strange circumstances while scuba diving in Queensland, Australia. The woman was on her honeymoon with her new husband Gabe Watson, a rescue diver, who was also her diving buddy. On October 22nd, the couple was scuba diving at the site of the historical shipwreck, Yongala. Within 2 minutes of beginning the dive, Tina lost consciousness and sank to the bottom, around 98 feet below the water's surface. One of the divers nearby later claimed that he saw Gabe engage in an underwater bear hug with Tina as she was struggling. Afterwards, Gabe reportedly headed to the surface as she fell to the bottom. Another diver took a picture of his wife and by chance caught Tina in the background as she laid face up on the ocean floor. The cause of death was determined to have been drowning, and evidence of murder started piling up against Gabe. The man gave 16 different accounts of what had happened to the authorities, none of which coincided with what the single eyewitness had reported or with what his dive computer had recorded. The initial suspicion was that he turned off his wife's regulator, held her until she was unconscious, and then turned it on before letting her sink. The belief was that he killed his wife for her life insurance. Gabe eventually pled guilty to manslaughter, admitting that he'd failed to provide Tina with proper assistance. However, it later emerged that the woman had had surgery to correct an irregular heartbeat 2 years prior to the incident, which she didn't mention on her dive application. Gabe had received his rescue diver certification over a 2-day course in Alabama, thus he had no rescue and very limited open water experience. It was concluded that Gabe hadn't killed his wife, but rather abandoned her in desperation to save his own life. The case against him was dismissed by an Alabama judge. From speeding down residential areas to tragic accidents that left families in tears, here's what happens when street racing goes wrong. Number 8. Dubbo crash. In April 2012, 2 vehicles were involved in a drag race gone wrong on Brisbane Street in Dubbo, Australia. One was a Holden Statesman and the other a Mitsubishi FTO. Both vehicles were driven by men in their early 20s. As they sped along the street, they reached a rise on the stretch of the road known by residents as a portion where accidents frequently happened. Both drivers independently lost control of their vehicles. The Statesman hit a tree on private property, while the Mitsubishi clipped an electric pole before hitting another tree in the adjoining property. The driver of the Mitsubishi was ejected 16 feet from his vehicle and landed on the road. He was taken to the hospital in critical condition. The noise of the impact woke up the couple inside the house, who discovered the FTO pinned against a tree in their front yard. Neighbors compared the scene to that of a bomb site. The driver of the Statesman was pronounced dead at the scene. There was also a passenger inside the vehicle, a 19-year-old male who suffered severe neck injuries. 2 other young men had reportedly gotten out of the vehicles before the drag race started. According to one of the residents, the 2 of them kept talking about not wanting to go to one of their friend's funeral. Number 7. Accident in North Little Rock. 12-year-old Anya Dilworth was killed in June 2018 in what the police believe was an illegal race. Anya's father, Michael Lynn Scales, was driving a Ford Crown Victoria, racing against a maroon Ford Mustang driven by Brandon Rogers. The 2 men were driving at a high speed down Riverfront Drive in North Little Rock, Arkansas. At some point, without any consideration that his daughter was in the car with him, Scales swerved into the Mustang, striking it on the side. Rogers also had a child in a vehicle with him, an 11-year-old boy. The impact caused both drivers to lose control of their vehicles. They struck several trees and street signs before the Crown Victoria hit a pole so hard that it was torn in half. Anya was the only fatality in the accident, while the others sustained serious injuries. Both drivers were arrested and charged with child endangerment as well as street racing. Additionally, Scales was charged with manslaughter. This wasn't the first run-in with the law for either of them. Rogers' criminal record included selling stolen aluminium, a carjacking, as well as drug trafficking and firearm charges. Scales' criminal history is even darker. In 2009, he and his cousin took part in a robbery in which a man was fatally shot. Scales then hid the gun used by his cousin in the murder. He later testified against him in return for a reduced sentence, but still went to prison. In fact, he was on parole at the time of the accident that claimed his daughter's life. Number 6. San Bernardino accident. A high-speed drag race in San Bernardino, California ended in tragedy in the spring of 2016, but no names were released to the public. Their vehicles were clocked at speeds of up to 90 miles per hour, and part of the street race was captured by surveillance cameras. At about 3:15 p.m., the driver in the lead car lost control of the vehicle and crashed into a light pole. The impact was so severe that it almost tore the car in half before it burst into flames. The driver was pronounced dead at the scene. The mangled vehicle came to a rest in the parking lot of E. Neil Roberts Elementary. The extent of the tragedy could have been far greater, but fortunately, the school was closed for spring break. Number 5. Tragic race in Chatsworth. An illegal street race turned tragic in LA's Chatsworth neighborhood after a car plowed into a crowd of over 60 people. The collision occurred in a commercial area known for illegal street racing. In the pre-planned event, 21-year-old Henry Michael Gevagayan lost control of the Ford Mustang he was driving, which was described by the authorities as very powerful. The car swerved to a sidewalk, striking those who'd gathered to watch the race. 2 spectators were fatally injured while another was left in serious condition. The crowd had dispersed by the time the police arrived on the scene. Gevagayan fled as well. The police began their search for him and are seeking to bring murder charges against him. Bill Bustos, the LAPD's lead detective on the case, said during a press conference, "Please turn yourself in. It's just a matter of time before we get to you." Number 4. Crash in Massachusetts. In May 2018, 27-year-old Matthew Peter, driving his father's Subaru Forester, challenged Michael Ludington's GMC pickup in an impromptu street race. Both vehicles were driven at high speed on the residential Plain Street in Stoughton, Massachusetts. Ludington lost control of his vehicle and crashed it into a tree. His fiancée, mother of two, Angie Goodrich, was in the car as well. Both of them died on impact as Peter sped away. Then several months later, the police retrieved a video that originated from Peter's cell phone. It showed that he was the one who'd initiated the race. In the footage, he's recording himself driving erratically and yelling at other cars before engaging Ludington's pickup. When he tried to pull away, Peter reportedly could be heard saying, "Oh, get back here." According to the police, he recorded the moment that Ludington's car crashed. He sent the video to his father 30 minutes later, who didn't report it and was subsequently charged with impeding an investigation. Peter also sent a voicemail to his girlfriend describing what he'd just seen. According to the court documents, he later sent her disturbing texts, blaming the couple for the accident and saying that he wished he could revive them, only to put them through the pole again. He then instructs her not to tell anyone about the crash. Peter had a history of speeding violations and crashes. The charges he faced after this included 2 homicide counts, speeding, and using a mobile phone while driving. Number 3. Moreno Valley Freeway Crash. Valentino Miguel Ramos and fiancée Ariana Ruby Luna were the victims of a brutal car crash on the 60 freeway in California's Moreno Valley. The accident took place in late summer of 2018. They were in the backseat of a 1999 white BMW. 3 other people were present in the vehicle, including the driver, 21-year-old Pollo Nahera Perez. According to eyewitnesses, he was driving at a high speed because he was racing 2 other cars. Perez lost control of the vehicle, which crashed into the guardrail and flipped. The sheer force of the impact ejected 2 passengers while 3 others remained trapped inside. In the end, Ramos, Luna, Perez, and the man in the front passenger seat were all killed in the crash. Luna was pregnant at the time. Several days earlier, she and Ramos had just celebrated a baby shower of their unborn son. The only survivor was an unnamed 19-year-old man who sustained serious injuries. The cars that Perez had been racing with, a Honda Civic and a Mazda hatchback, fled when the accident occurred. Number 2. Ector County Accident. 4 lives were lost and a family was left in shambles after a devastating accident in Ector County, Texas. On October 1st, 2018, Albertizo Valenzuela and Christian Flores were racing their Dodge Challengers westbound on 16th Street. Flores then lost control of his car and crashed into Valenzuela's Challenger, sending it towards the eastbound lanes. It crashed into a Chevrolet Impala with 4 people inside. 47-year-old Araceli Galbadon and her children, 20-year-old Cassandra, 17-year-old Sergio, and 8-year-old Elias. Galbadon and her daughter died at the scene, as did Christian Flores. Galbadon's youngest son died from injuries sustained in the accident at the University Medical Center in Lubbock. Her eldest son, Sergio, who was taken to the same hospital, was in a serious but stable condition. Number 1. Rowville Car Accident. In February 2019, a suspected drag race gone wrong in Rowville, East Melbourne, claimed the life of 17-year-old Nikita Wells. The teenager was in the back seat of a Holden while her older sister was behind the wheel. They were involved in a horrific 3-car crash that sent one of the cars into an electric pole, violently tearing it in half. It's believed that Wells' sister lost control of their vehicle and careered into another after she'd been cut off. 5 people were taken to the hospital, but Wells was the only recorded fatality. Residents of the Rowville area claimed that they saw cars flying down the road prior to the crash. The police believe that at least 2 of the cars were drag racing in broad daylight when the accident occurred. From tragic incidents to gruesome injuries, this is what happens when ballet goes wrong. Number 8. Emma Livery. Emma Livery was a gifted 19th century ballerina who suffered a tragic death. On November 15, 1862, the 20-year-old was rehearsing for a show in which she played the title role. During her second act entrance, Livery shook out her skirts, which caught fire on a gaslight. She burst into flames, clasping the burning material to her torso out of modesty. Livery ran across the stage 3 times before other dancers and firemen extinguished the flames that had engulfed her body. The doctors in attendance examined her and found that pieces of her costume had melted into her flesh. Whatever remained of her costume can still be viewed at the Opera Museum in Paris. Livery had severe burns on her waist, back, thighs, shoulders, and arms. The incident could have reportedly been avoided as there were fire materials at the time. Yet even after suffering for months because of her burns, Livery still claimed, should I ever return to the stage, I would never think of wearing them. They are so ugly. She died in 1863 after her wounds opened up and she developed septicemia. Number 7. Anna Pavlova. Russian ballerina Anna Pavlova is one of the best-known figures in ballet history. The dying swan role, created alongside choreographer Mikhail Fokine, has inspired ballerinas for decades. Pavlova danced with the Imperial Russian Ballet and the Ballets Russes before she formed her own ballet company. She became the first ballerina to take ballet around the world, touring in the United States, India, Australia, and South America. Pavlova developed pneumonia while touring the Netherlands, and her doctors told her that she would need surgery. They also told her the operation meant she would never dance again. To this, Pavlova reportedly answered, "If I can't dance, then I'd rather be dead." Her determination to keep dancing eventually led to her death. She succumbed to pleurisy in 1931, a few weeks before her 50th birthday. Number 6. Alexander Money Carly. In 1998, Alexander Money Carly died during rehearsal for a production of Romeo and Juliet with the Dutch National Ballet in Amsterdam. The 35-year-old had tried to rescue the production's director, who'd fallen off stage after mistaking the dark safety netting for part of it. The director landed in the orchestra pit, and Money Carly rushed to his aid, falling head first from several feet. He died from his injuries in the hospital 2 days later. An inquiry revealed that there wasn't sufficient lighting on the stage. Additionally, the orchestra pit, which was normally raised to stage level, had been lowered that day to allow access for electricians. His death was ruled accidental. Number 5. Ageism and sexism. The career of a ballet dancer is quite short. Most of them begin dancing professionally when they're 19 and transition to a different career by their mid-30s. There have been complaints of ageism in ballet, as most of the choreography is often created in such a way that it can only be executed by a dancer that's relatively young. The way ballet is commonly structured has often drawn criticism for not respecting women. These critiques are often focused on a male director or choreographer who uses women's bodies as the medium for his artistic vision, but who often objectifies, ignores, or silences the women involved in the process. Number 4. Stress. Training in ballet comes with a great degree of perfectionism. Ballet dancers are under constant expectations to conform to highly exigent standards. Competition in their trade is fierce, and the positions in prestigious companies are limited. Those selected for the principal role in a production know that many others would consider themselves very fortunate to be in that same position. It isn't uncommon for them to fear that they're going to be replaced. That's why many perform even if their health is in jeopardy. They weather through the grueling pain caused by their injuries without ever showing it. There's also the fear that if they contact a doctor, they'll be given the crushing news that they should give up dancing. The stress of being replaced, the pressure of performing, and the fear of failure can often lead to serious mental issues. Recent studies have found that dancers tend to have a higher psychological inflexibility, a state of mind connected to anxiety and depression in teenagers. It involves an excessive involvement in internal events such as memories, emotions, and thoughts, which can ultimately prove detrimental to mental health. Number 3. Eating disorders. For ballerinas, body image issues start early. Many ballet schools hold regular weigh-ins, which ballet dancers must take part in from a young age. Many dancers starve themselves in the days leading up to the weigh-ins, and even so, they're often told they need to lose more weight. Because ballet is a visual expression and the dancers wear skin-tight clothes, they become extremely self-conscious about the way they look. In some circles, the body of the ballerina is viewed as the ideal body type, but in order to obtain it, dancers often push themselves to unhealthy limits. Some choose to follow drastic diets as well as smoke cigarettes and drink coffee to keep their weight down. The problem with this is that their bodies become frail, even though their craft requires a high level of strength and flexibility. A study revealed that ballet dancers are 3 times more likely to develop an eating disorder, while another indicates that 1 in 5 dancers typically suffers from such a condition. Anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder are statistically high among ballet dancers. Common effects of eating disorders include extreme slenderness, hair loss, infertility, or anemia due to iron deficiency. If they're not getting enough calcium, it can lead to bone deterioration. Also, due to the lack of proper nourishment, the muscles begin to consume themselves. This can be a life-threatening issue if the muscular deterioration ends up affecting the heart. Yet there are dancers who seem to be defying the ideal ballerina stereotype. Misty Copeland, a soloist for the American Ballet Theatre, was considered a prodigy in her youth, but her bones were becoming brittle. She was given birth control pills to trigger the hormones that would strengthen her bones. However, her body began to change, and she started to gain weight, with which she initially struggled. However, Copeland would eventually become the staple of the strong ballerina, in contrast with the traditional frail body type. Number 2. Other health issues. Research suggests that ballet dancers suffer injuries to such an extent that their profession is comparable to that of athletes in contact sports. The wear and tear on their bodies is among the reasons why their careers are so short. Arthritis and inflammation of the joints is one of the most common ailments they experience. It's characterized by pain and stiffness in their ankles and knees. The hips are affected by the imbalance of the amount of turn out and turn in during the routines. In some cases, ballerinas undergo hip replacements once their career is over. Aside from that, the lower back is subjected to repetitive shocks, and they can suffer knee injuries in the form of meniscal or cartilage tears. Out of all these medical issues, one rises above the rest as the most notorious injury associated with ballet. Number 1. Ballerina feet. The feet are perhaps the most commonly injured part of a ballerina's body. This is because a lot of the movements they perform have to be executed en pointe. What this means is that their entire body weight is supported by the tips of their feet. Ballerinas wear special lightweight shoes which offer little in the way of protection. The shoes and the demanding moves that have to be performed over and over again eventually wreak havoc on the feet. Cuts, bruises, blisters, and calluses are frequent occurrences. Nails break, grow inward, or even fall off, and the trauma can sometimes result in infections. It's why some ballerinas opt to have their nails removed entirely. Ballerinas have to arch their feet to create certain lines, and this causes pain and swelling in the plantar fascia, a strip of tissue that runs along the bottom of the foot. Sprains and stress fractures aren't uncommon, nor is the fact that a dancer will often choose to power through them, which results in more serious damage. Male ballet dancers have to experience the toll their profession takes on their feet as well. The movements they perform frequently involve jumps, turns, or lifts, which often result in broken toes, sprained ankles, or Achilles tendon injuries. From afar, the performances that ballet dancers put on may look graceful, flowing, and effortless. However, few of those who admire the shows are aware of the physical and psychological anguish that dancers sometimes have to go through. Thanks for watching. If you could live as another person for a year, would you rather it be Cristiano Ronaldo now or Michael Jordan in his prime? Let us know in the comments section below.